For this session, we'll go into what do we do about it. Before we do that, I'll just quickly say that this will be a chance for our witnesses to weigh in, as well as you. So it's a combination, as we always do, of folks who are basically pre-planned, and then folks who have something else to say. And also, just before I leave this stage, I wanted to say two things. We are going to be doing a staff photo at just after this at around 3. So if you wanted to see all of the team, there's a huge team, lots of people who are up in what we call our situation room, who've been working behind the scenes. It's a big event, as you can appreciate. Lots of people doing lots of things, and they're doing it really well. And it'd be nice if you could just stick around and say hello to them. Ooh, I'm getting weepy. Woo. I also just wanted to say, oh, this is weird. Say thank you to the people I've been working with, to Charlie, to Aisha, to Aline, to Dina, to John, to Adrian, to, I'm missing people, to Scott. I just can't see them, but they're there, and it's been a wonderful experience. I've enjoyed it, and I hope that you have too. We're all part of a big family, and thanks very much to 6 Degrees. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Charlie Foran, our Chief Executive Officer of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship.
Thank you. And thank you for staying with us for the final afternoon of 6 Degrees. We want for this space, for this stage, for these rooms, for these days, to bring together people and ideas at the same time, and for those people to leave feeling empowered, feeling like they want to take those conversations, those provocations, those disruptions, whatever they are, back to their work, to their communities, to their countries. And we also want them to take away friendships, people they've met, people they're planning to work with, they hope to stay connected with. 6 Degrees is a convening space, and it's an intellectual space, and I think, and we hope, it is on some level a spiritual space. We did our first iteration last September, and frankly, we were pretty thrilled to survive doing our first iteration at this scale. And we came away with one regret, which is that we hadn't found a way to bring together all that we'd heard in those 2.5 days. We hadn't found a way to, in a sense, come away from 6 Degrees with a list, an action plan, calls to action. We didn't have the time, we didn't have the mental space. We determined then to create this final session called What's Next? And we determined that for the final session, there would be no one on our beloved round stage. Instead, we would all be together, literally on the floor, talking through ideas. A.R. Malik, you know from the Coffee House. Some of you may know from him working with us in The Hague. And we have entrusted A.R., and he's going to explain, he in turn has entrusted a group of people who have been listening and talking to you for the last 2.5 days to walk us through these next 90 essential minutes for 6 Degrees going forward. We need to know, in a sense, what has come clear as the priorities, what has come clear as those calls to action, because then we will move with them. We'll move with them in our next iterations in Canada and abroad, and we will embrace them in our research and how we think about and what we think about. So this is very important. This is arguably the most important 90 minutes of this whole 3 days. So I thank you in advance for the contributions you're going to make. We encourage you to speak. We encourage you to speak more than once. Beyond the first 20 minutes or so of the witnesses, this will be an open floor moderated by AR. So welcome to What's Next.
Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, a big round of applause for the shared space that we've all created, for the amazing people who made this happen, for our tech crew and the incredible crew of volunteers. We wouldn't be able to discuss what's next without them. As that video was playing, I felt like I needed to kind of get up and dance. And in a way, what we're going to be doing over the next 90 minutes is a bit of an intellectual, spiritual dance as we try to get a handle of what we've discussed over the last few days. What are some of the conclusions that we've reached? What are the fault lines that have been revealed? And what are the bridges, both virtual, ideational, intellectual, and physical, that we can create to give this gathering the vision that its founders intended that it should have? As Charlie quite rightfully said, 6 Degrees is part of a process. The thing that brought me and so many of you to this space was that we're in the round. We're looking at each other, we're facing each other. And this afternoon, I hope you'll embrace your role as not only participants, but your role as visionaries with gusto. Before I ask the witnesses to take 2 minutes each and to introduce to us some, what I hope will be provocative and profound interventions of what should come next, I just want to put out some ground rules. You know, I think in any conference and any gathering, we look at the gathering and we see the positives and we see areas of improvement. I know that this team is looking for that kind of feedback. This session is about taking the ideas forward. A little bit later this afternoon, all of you will receive an email. There'll be a feedback survey there. I want you all to be robust in your feedback, to talk about the things that worked well and talk about the things that could work better. That's a direct opportunity for us. That's going to be a direct opportunity for us to improve the way that we do this work. Before we get started onto the witnesses, I want to bring up on the screens the results of the Coffee House poll. Yesterday, about 100 of you met together upstairs in the spirit of the great Ottoman or London or Viennese coffee houses to discuss 10 critical, vital, disruptive contentions. And the 10 groups came back with 10 statements that were meant to inspire conversation during this session. These are the top three calls to action based on your votes, and thank you so much for participating in that poll. Let's have a quick look at it. I believe from table 10 we had attend the Indian Residential School System Legacy Structure Unveiling on October the 10th, 2018 at Nathan Phillips Square here in Toronto to celebrate and honor residential school survivors. Table 10 was our unique table yesterday. They were what I called the self-organizing table. We had no table 10 going into the coffee house. But a table 10 showed up, and they were adamant that the issues around Indigenous values and Indigenous history be recognized. And I'm really excited to have this at the top of the list. This is a call of action to all of us to make sure that those of us who are in Toronto are there on the 10th of October, and those of us who are not are there in spirit and in heart and in solidarity. The second, accept that we all have a responsibility to disrupt the status quo, claim our right to be, and not ask permission in doing so. I guarantee you over the next 85 minutes, that's exactly what's going to happen in this room. And finally, affirm global citizenship as an idea that values unity and diversity and implies a greater responsibility to our human family. I think back to the conversation at yesterday afternoon's 365, where Asma Malik and Nigan Sinclair kind of went back and forth on what responsibility and home feels like, looks like, and sounds like. And what Nigan said really resonated with me around the idea of a home that is forever welcoming, that is forever expanding based on certain immutable values and principles. Brothers and sisters, we're gonna get started. I had an incredible group of 7, which has unfortunately been reduced to 6 because of an illness of one of our witnesses. We had 7 incredible people who were charged with, on the very first night of 6 Degrees, to be witnesses, to speak to you, to attend the sessions, to have conversations over coffee and lunch and dinner, to watch the films with you, and to get a sense of what is happening on the ground. What are the conversations that you were having, and how can we reflect those conversations? How can we reflect the ideas that you were generating, the critiques that you were owning? How can we reflect them in statements that would take us forward and be visionary? Well, I can assure you that these 6 people have come up with truly visionary and important statements. And we're going to hear from each of them in turn. You're going to see the statements on your screens, and then hopefully during the conversation they'll continue scrolling so we can refer to them. After we hear the witness statements, we're going to come to you. And it's going to be an opportunity to pick up anything you want, to throw something into the mix. What I will say is that keep your comments visionary. Think about what's next. Think about how we can take this process, the work that you do, the work that your communities are engaged in, forward. If I hear too much kvetching, I'm going to stop you. I'll be honest. I'm going to be straight. If I hear too much kvetching, I'm going to stop you because I don't want this to be a kvetch fest. But what I want it to be, and I think what we all want it to be, is walk out of here absolutely enthused and energized around what is possible through the lenses of each of our own personal and lived experiences and communal experiences. It's my pleasure to introduce our first witness. Emma Gilchrist is the Executive Director of DeSmog Canada, an online platform for reporting on the environment and climate. She hails from Vancouver Island, and I'm going to hand over the mic to Emma Gilchrist for our first witness statement.
Thanks for that, AR. So as AR mentioned, I'm an environment reporter, and so it's been really interesting to walk into this conversation because it's all really new and fresh to me, and I've learned a ton, and I haven't really operated in this particular kind of space before. So one of the key things that I've taken away is the power of story. How many people saw the Ai Weiwei film last night, just by a show of hands? I found it one of those things, it was like hard to watch that and then like walk back into the world and just continue on with your normal life. I was like, so I go back to a hotel and go to bed now? It was so disruptive in the best of ways. And it made me think about Michael Sandel's argument that we need meaningful public deliberation and how he tried to model that on the first night. And without that meaningful public deliberation, we risk the hollowing out of public discourse. And what Sandel said was that when that public discourse does become very hollowed out, as has happened in many democracies of late, it leaves a void that is often filled by xenophobia and nationalism. And so I think the thing that I'm really taking away is this opportunity to really create our own compelling stories and challenge the prevailing narratives. Some of the prevailing narratives that disruptive discourse can come into, that I saw coming up a lot this week. You know, the idea that immigrants are somehow an economic drain, a drain on the economy, it was a kind of an implicit narrative that came up a lot across different discussions, and I don't think was disrupted enough. Doug Saunders from the Globe and Mail was just working on one of the earlier sessions, and you know, he has a book coming out on Canada's underpopulation problem, and he puts forth an idea that we desperately need to increase immigration in this country. And so that's a really cool example of a disruptive narrative that doesn't just kind of accept that economic narrative and say, oh, we're going to stand over here and talk about morals, but it actually challenges that. Another narrative that a lot of people surfaced was this concern about the kind of we're so great narrative in Canada. It's so easy right now. People are like, well, you're so much better than Trump. You guys are so much better than Europe. And it's, there's a risk of sitting back on our laurels, especially when we look at how Canada has treated its Indigenous peoples and continues to treat its Indigenous peoples in this very moment out in British Columbia, we're in the process of flooding Indigenous people off their lands for a hydro dam that is still under review to see whether we even need it. So there's some pretty, that's a disruptive narrative to this idea that Canada is so great. One more that came up was climate change. It was kind of a bit of an elephant in the room. In the first session yesterday morning, a number of people brought it up. I don't want to say it's the elephant in the room. It's one of many elephants in the room, probably. But climate change is a driving force behind the refugee crisis, and that is only going to accelerate. And so I wonder if there are ways to bring that disruptive narrative more into the room next year. So going forward, my kind of what next is how can we directly address the need to forward more of these disruptive narratives? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. I have a sneaking suspicion this is something we're going to return to often over the course of this conversation. Let me introduce you to Coral Salvador Soy. Coral is a junior fellow this year. She hails from Barcelona, of Catalan descent, but right now she's in Greece, and she's been working on the front lines of what has come to be known as the refugee crisis, particularly working on how individuals who have come from places like Syria and beyond are taken care of, and what kind of care structures there are for them in places like Greece, where a lot of them now feel not only stateless, but unable to move. Coral, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'm Coral, and I want to say that I'm so glad to have that chance to talk here, because that's my voice, but that's all my refugee friends' voice today, too. So, for the last 2 years in Barcelona, we have had like 2 really famous slogans, which are Obriu fronteres and Benvinguts refugiats, which in English means open the borders and welcome refugee. And we have been talking about opening borders and walls here a lot, but actually not about the real reasons that are making them to leave their countries. If anyone here asks refugees what they really wanted to do, they will likely say that they just wanted to stay in their country, but they were forced to leave. So what's next? We should think more about the real roots of these issues in order to find real solutions and to deal with it. So what is happening, for example, in Syria, the war in Syria, has to be explained in general, and including in schools too, in order to find this solution. So even if the media is not talking about it anymore, so because only by doing that, anyone will be able to say, I didn't know anything about it, and will be able to push people to get involved in finding that solution. So we have been talking also about building bridges, which is so important, but we are all aware that immigration issues are taking place all over the world. So each country is dealing with it differently. So I guess that a good step will be like improving and increasing the international cooperation, not only building bridges inside Canada, but also with other countries, as for example, European ones. Because we have been discussing too that Europe is not handling the refugee situation well, which is true, whereas Canada has been, or at least so much better than us. So through this international cooperation, Europe could have the chance to learn from you and hopefully follow by example. We are aware that all these issues depend on the government too, but finally, if we are talking about building bridges, it's because we want to join people from the both sides, right? So I think that we should try, like, let's make people think, let's explain to people what the roots of these issues are. Let's explain people how are you like dealing with all these issues, your country, Canada, and let's make them change their mind. Because finally people are the ones who have the power to choose the governments. So if someday we can change that, we'll be closer to that solution. So let's look at the future and not the past anymore.
Thank you, Coral. So a mix of political consciousness and grassroots global solution making. Our next witness is Asad Chishti. Many of you have seen him around 6 Degrees with his camera. It's not just an indulgence for Asad. Asad is a chronicler of not only his life, but the intersections in his life. He's the founder of an amazing, I would say, movement almost called Chairs and Tables, which every year takes a big idea and explores it for the whole year. He's just cycled from coast to coast to coast, and he's a former junior fellow here at 6 Degrees, and he is going to be addressing what are we willing to sacrifice. Asad, the floor is yours.
Ani, Bojo, Salam. Je ne comprends pas pourquoi nous ne parlons pas une autre language. Why don't we speak another language? If we can speak just one, maybe we can just listen to just one. And then how do we become just ones? Climbing the totem poles, kicking those who are at the bottom, totem poles propping up Turtle Island, that is our foundation, our roots, where we live. The insistent insistence of persistence with great consistence that we deserve a more poetic resistance. Not just fighting and struggling and striving for our daily subsistence. To be well adjusted in a society that is profoundly sick, that is no measure of good health. We need old ways to look at new things and new ways to look at old things. Look, listen, learn, leap, unlook, re-listen, unlearn. Pragmatic poet philosophers, one hand in the stars and one in the soil. If we do not tell these stories, we will find that neglect is as powerful a weapon as fire. Wisdom, perhaps, cannot be scaled in our schoolyards or the halls of Yale. Speak something truthful, if possible, beautiful. We cannot listen, for we are allergic to silence. So what are you willing to sacrifice? Your ego, your pride, your daily avocados? Everybody speaks of their rights. But what is your responsibility? The future is already here. It's just not equitably distributed. It is on its way. What do we owe the future? How? And what do we need to sacrifice? Now, today, so that the future has clean water and fertile land and air and curious minds and capable bodies.
Asad, thank you so much. That was beautiful. I can make that editorial comment because I'm the MC for this session. Thank you. One bearded man says to another. I met Craig Damian Smith last year. I was taken by his sense of humor, but his incredible energy and the fact that here was an academic who was willing to step far outside the hallowed halls of the ivory towers to engage not only with his subjects, but to stand in solidarity with them. Craig is the co-founder and research director of the Together Project. He's also the associate director of the Global Migration Lab at the Munk Center, and a newly minted, I don't know if I should say this, but I'm going to say it now, I've begun saying it, a newly minted PhD. Harness the productive energy of discomfort, Mr. Smith.
It's actually, it's Dr. Smith now. We all wrote these things in the last 20 minutes or so, and Will's still writing, so I mean like an extra round of applause for that poem. I'll talk to you guys back here first. So the analogy that we're all using is the walls and bridges and homes. So I'll start pro forma with an analogy. If we think of some bridges that are built of arches, the way that arches work is a tension and two forces pushing into one another to maintain some kind of stability. And our roles as witnesses today, or in the past few days, was supposed to be to talk to people and have conversations. And one of the things that people talked about was that we're in some kind of like echo chamber here, or preaching to the choir. And I don't think that that's actually true. You know, we had conversations with people about, you know, what they would do to open up the dialogue, and it was, what if we invited a men's rights activist, or what if we invited, you know, somebody from, I don't know, the psychology department at the University of Toronto named Jordan Peterson. And I'm not sure that that would actually be productive. And a lot of the productive conversations that we're having today is because we agree on the kind of meta issues here. We agree that maybe Canada's not a perfect place and we don't integrate refugees very well. And a show of hands here, from last year or this year, how many people have, you know, developed projects that they think might go forward, or partnerships from last year to this year? Okay, that's fewer than I imagined. So, okay, that fell flat a little bit. But you have to move forward from these things. And I would say just kind of, you know, harnessing the tension that we have here. We didn't agree on everything, but we agree on the meta points that that inclusion might be a problematic term, but the things that we agree on, we can move forward on. And that some of the tensions that came up in after the different roundtables, and especially after the breakout sessions, were tensions around not whether or not inclusivity is a good thing, but especially on the journalism panel today, you know, what would it mean to make that panel more inclusive by including people with disabilities, and not whether or not, you know, inclusion is a good value in general. And I think that, you know, if you spend time on university campuses, you see that there's this kind of dangerous cannibalism of the left, broadly called, that can happen, where people who are all natural allies and moving in a common direction can focus on this kind of narcissism of small differences, even though we're all in a struggle together. And that's, you know, harness that productive energy of discomfort within whatever we call this movement. That's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Craig. We hear a lot about France, and we often hear about it when the banlieues or the suburbs outside of Paris or a large French city erupt in some kind of violence, and we go through the same old cycle of recrimination. Nasira Al-Muaddam is one who doesn't dwell in cycles of recrimination. She is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Bondi blog that has given voice to those individuals, communities that have not had a voice in the French mainstream. She's doing some incredible work into amplifying those voices. We're very pleased that Nasira is with us today, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about creating unlikely conversations. Nasira.
Thank you. So just thank you for this opportunity to talk to such amazing and different people. And thank you for the ICC. Thank you for all the amazing 6 Degrees team, Alain and the others. Thank you very much. I'm not the founder of Bondi blog. I wish I were, but I'm not. I'm the editor-in-chief, and I just want to have a message to Nordine Nabili, who was my predecessor, the former director who made an amazing job in the Bondi blog. The thing I wanted to tell you today is what can we do after all these conversations? All of you are seated here and you heard a lot of words, a lot of conversation. You saw also film and so on. You talk to each other. But so what next? So what can we get from all this conversation we have together? Politically, for instance, we are in many occasions, in many opportunities, so weak towards racism, intolerance, Islamophobia, intolerance against people who have disabilities. So what can we do concretely? What can we do? What can we say? How can we act when we are face to face to this kind of situations? And I think we have to think about the tools that we can together think about what kind of political tools, concrete tools, we can have to convince people who are not sharing our ideas, because here we are, I think we share the same values, humanity, tolerance, and so on. But outside, there are some people who are not sharing our values, and we have to live with them. We have to coexist together. And so I think we have to reflect and we have to think about these political tools. And about media, because as a journalist, this is my reflection, my daily reflection. How can people who read us know about our daily life in the newsrooms, in the medias? I'm sure if I ask you, each of you, you don't know how we produce information. But you read us all the day. You watch TV news, you listen to radios, but concretely, you don't know about our work. And this work has consequences to your daily life. When we are talking about suburbs in France, for instance, when there are some riots, some protestations, when we are saying that some people are criminals because they are black, Arabs, Muslims, those words have consequences, concrete consequences. So how can you, as readers, as people who are watching TV, how can you concretely be a part of our work? Because our work as journalists is simple, is to have witnesses and to take the part of humanity of each of you. You are my première ressource, as we say in French. Ma matière première. My first material is you. You. But you have to be aware of what our work is. And I think we have to reflect, we have to think about, like a workshop, when we can together meet and create together. Create, for instance, publications. Well, go outside here, the art gallery. I'm sure that in the neighborhood we can go on the ground and make reports together and publish together, because I think you have to be aware of what our work is, because we are in a period where there is so much propaganda, so much rumors on social media, and I think if we want to struggle against this, we have to make it together.
Nasira. Co-creation, tools transfer, using those to create unlikely conversations. Well, last but certainly not least is Will Prosper. Will is a documentary filmmaker. He's an activist from Montreal. And he's been teaching us in the Witness Group a lot about his work in Montreal North, one of the most deprived ridings in the country, and the kind of building of social and political capital that is going on in those places that, of course, is ignored in the mainstream, but which is, in some ways, a remarkable example of what happens when communities come together and mobilize. Colonialism is a hell of a drug. Tell us why, Will Prosper.
I'd like to say to everybody, first and foremost, Ayi Bobo. You can repeat that. Ayi Bobo. This is like, thank you. This is Creole, like amen. So it doesn't have to be religious, but that's what it means. I quoted the great philosopher Rick James for colonialism is a hell of a drug. I think it was important. And on the first session that we've had at the theater, Arun mentioned something that is really important, that we often talk about issues from the privilege lenses perspective and not otherwise, and that is something that has to be changed. And I just want to quote as well Frantz Fanon, who also mentioned, he's a great academic that most people know. He also mentioned, it took me 10 years to unlearn what I've learned in the academia field. So we need to start talking this way. We need to think differently. That's what we need to do. Although we are a fairly recent democracy, Occidental democracy, I must say. We just celebrated the 375th anniversary of the city of Montreal when we should be celebrating the 6,375th anniversary of the Iroquois in Montreal. Being a filmmaker, in the past century, we've talked about democracy a whole lot, always in the same lens, same perspective, and we need a different perspective. And I think it's grandiose from 6 Degrees to realize that they're fairly recent, fairly new, and they want to change that as well. So that's why we are here. And just an example that AR mentioned, I think it's very important to mention also. He said, do you know about the Ghana think tank? I never heard of the Ghana think tank. And I think it's important that we think about the Ghana think tank because they've set up something that is very interesting. And they set up laboratories in so-called developing countries to help solve first world problems. Because it's affecting all of us. So this is what we need to be doing as well. We need to think in these lenses. We need to think in this different way. And quite often we always look at our democracy, but take a look at Rwanda. This is now the place that has the most women elected in parliament, and we are far behind. But we never take a look at Rwanda. We always focus on our country in this place in the Occidental view. Take a look at the Asian religion, Vodou. A lot of people don't know about Vodou, but Vodou, you have some loas, which are our spiritual goddess. And these loas, some of them are not gender assigned. And same thing for indigenous nation. They have spiritual beings also that are not gender assigned. So that makes you realize that colonialism is actually the one that is putting in homophobia in places like that, because this is not something that was part of certain civilizations. So it's very important to know that as well. And we've talked about walls. Walls, we have lots of walls. And in Montreal, we had an exhibition from indigenous street artists, and they've called it Listen to the Walls. We don't need to see the walls because they are our foundation. We need to know the foundation first and foremost. And also, you know, we talk about bridges. And in Quebec, we have Algonquins, and they did not build bridges, but they knew where the big river narrows down, and they call it Quebec. And this is where people met. This is where they gather to assemble different ideas. And these things are surrounding us, and we need to know about them. So, yes, sorry about that because I just wrote everything down, so I'm just going to finish my last part. So, we need to find different flows of different rivers and build a bridge to the future, although we don't know what that bridge looked like. To be futuristic, you have to learn from the past. And just an example, you know, Haitians, because I'm a really proud Haitian, as you might know, they got rid of slavery. Emily Nicolas talked about the different layers on the bridge, the layers of oppression. And this is what they fought against. They call it combat. They assemble themselves, they gather themselves, and they call it l'union fait la force. And by doing that, they got rid of slavery, which is the most brutal force of slavery. And they also said the quote, another quote, but a motto that they used to have, it was liberté ou la mort. And this is important. We have to take a look at it in these lenses, liberté ou la mort. Because when we know death is coming, we're going to fight to be free. So also, I feel that as a community, we all live below the well of knowledge that we have. Because if you take a look around the world, you know, lots of people don't have access to knowledge. So we are living below our potential. So we need to reach our potential. And if we want to be futuristic or Afrofuturistic, as some of us say, we need to know that we are the past, all of us. That's what we are today. We are all the past. And we need to have the future in this place. And who are the future? Elementary and high school students. And they need to be here to realize the future. So this is what I'm going to conclude with. Just the last word of Al Weiwei that was there for the movie screening last night. He said, we've talked enough about wars. Let's talk about peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Will. Well, our witnesses have given us a tour de force about co-creation, about working together. The floor is now open. Respond to them. Enter the dialogue and conversation. We have several mic runners that are going around. Okay, I see a first hand over here. You ready? Please keep your comments short, sharp, and pithy so we hear as many of you as possible. Go for it.
And I just
Just
can be
speak.
heard. Okay. The whole discussion, for me personally, is not physical enough, meaning that if two people don't like each other, they move away from one another. And I feel like it's all on the very logical level, but we don't play enough, we don't spend enough time together, also doing nothing. Culture is developed out of, you know, a common sort of root of love and passion and friendship. And I feel like if we're going into this logical realm of the discussion all the time, we're really missing the point of having a good life all together. That does sometimes not make sense, sometimes it makes sense, but it's about the actual living experience. So I don't understand why we're over-logifying everything.
There's an important remark there about culture. And I think it was implicit in some of the remarks that the witnesses made. But thank you for making that very clear. And I hope we're able to pick that up.
And to dance and to create and to experience, really, you know, celebrate life.
I am all about dancing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. And we're going to come back to the idea of culture. Hold it in your heads, everyone. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. My name is Saad. I'm a recent graduate of the Masters of Immigration and Settlement Studies at Ryerson University. I want to make quick comments on Coral, Nasira, and Will.
Go for it.
So I really like the idea of, in order to fix an issue, we need really to go and to the root causes of the issue. So speaking about the refugees crisis, it's really amazing. However, we need to know what are the beyond the states and who creates this crisis, and we need to know who creates this war. So this is very important. We need to raise the knowledge among us. We are in a privileged space to share our thoughts and discussions. And then if I want to add on Nasira's comment, it is very important to transmit our knowledge to other platforms and be able to help people understand. Everything comes from ignorance, and if we are ignorant, we cannot move forward.
So let me ask you, are you directly saying it's about naming and shaming? It's about being surgical. Pinpoint, talk about the problem, even if it's, talk about the source of the problem, even if it's contentious.
Yes, definitely.
All right, I like it. Name, really shame, pinpoint, argue. Go ahead.
Thank you.
There you go.
Good to go. Right. My name is Christine Garza. I'm an accessibility advisor, and all voices are heard, but often disability is not included in our conversations, and I want to thank the two of you for including us. It crosses all boundaries, social, economic, and cultural. So what's next? Please, hear the walls that I have to face every day. And please see my uniqueness and see my abilities, which are really important to me. Secondly, invite me into your circle so I can have a voice and I can work with you in partnership to create the bridges. And thirdly, please support me like this strong arm so that I can create my home and that I can live my life of choice without barriers and without feeling like a burden. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's about expanding the circle, isn't it? And I think what I'm hearing from the witnesses, reflecting what we've been hearing in these rooms over the last 3 days, is that the circle needs to continue to expand. And if it doesn't, then we're stuck. We're going to go here first, and then we're coming over to you, and then we're heading back there. Go ahead.
Yeah, please, what's next? Please let's include administration as a political issue. So many people, when it comes to migration, when it comes to refugees, suffer a lot because of administrative restriction. It's very difficult for Syrians to enter your country. Without the invitation of Alain, it would not be possible. So you have to go so high rank. What does it mean for normal people who don't have the connections? Work on the administration. Please see it as a political adversary we have to tackle.
I think that, thank you very much. I want to connect that to what Coral was talking about. You know, you were talking about looking at systemic issues. And I know in our discussion something that came up was around, I think Craig, you might have said it, was around how do we create resources for increased capacity. And I think that speaks to the idea of administration and public policy. And once again, public policy doesn't fall very far beyond the place where we're at now, which brings us back to politics and political action. Yet again, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you, everyone. I think you've all pretty much summed what I'm taking out as well. What's next for me next year is bringing both my daughters, even if they have to take time off school, to such a space. And we talked a lot about youth and how youth need to be involved. We talked a lot about histories and education, and as much as I'm happy to see lots of history being incorporated into our curriculum, I think what's next for 360 is it needs to be a curriculum in school. And it just needs to be in school. If we're going to lead this conversation and change the world, it has to start from there. Thank you.
We're going to go to Andre next. Thank you very much for that. Andre, brother, go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My name is Andre Nadeu. I've been working in refugee crisis for the last 1.5 years in Greece and Italy. Plenty of good ideas, but the one who really called my attention was Assad's idea of what are we willing to sacrifice ourselves? And I think the first step would be like leaving the comfort zone and really being in the front line of the refugee crisis in order to really be in touch with these people and know their feelings, know what they have been through so far, and mainly getting outside of the Facebook bubble. And just with that, it will be possible to understand and make the next step forward.
So I'm going to push back on that, Andre, just for a second, because I know you can take it. The question yesterday was asked today by Assad, yesterday by Asma in the third 360 about what are we willing to sacrifice, what are we willing to give up. I'm going to ask you that. What do you think you are willing to give up? What do you think we as a society ought to be willing to give up? What kind of privilege are we willing to expend to ensure the kind of socially just society that you've just talked about?
As a journalist, for example, I have to give something in return. So what I do is volunteering journalism. I cannot pass by in a refugee camp, just taking some photographs. So what I do in my case is giving something in return about my photography, workshops, video workshops, and give yourself, give a hand, give something in return. And you don't have to be a journalist or whatever. It's something like give yourself, give your heart, and try to understand these people's feelings.
Thank you very much. We're right back there. Do you have the mic already? Fantastic. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Emily. The thing that struck me the most about what the witnesses said is the part about when so few people rose their hands in terms of what comes out of these conferences. And I'd like to suggest that relationships is one of the most important things that should come out of these conferences. How we relate to each other, how we talk to each other, shouldn't just leave this room. What's next is making sure that people connect. And a lot of the things that have been said is about people having different privilege, and people, who have the mic are not necessarily talking for personal experience, whereas some of the people who have experience have been in the audience. And so how do we make sure that when you see if you are older, if you see somebody younger in this room and you found them super talented, what are you going to do to bring them up in your organization? What are you going to do to make sure that the people who are outside of this room that you're going to meet in the street, how are you going to get them access? Because it's not about, sometimes when we talk about systemic issues, it becomes so big that people don't know what to do and how to act on them concretely. But there's so many people in this room that you could connect with and give opportunity to that leads to concrete action. So why don't we just do that and see what comes out of that next year? And I feel like if we start doing that, there's going to be a network of 6 Degree people that's going to lead to concrete action. And if we can amplify each other's work, we can amplify Canada. I
mean, this is a vital point. I think certainly John, Adrian, Charlie, and the team, you've seen that network develop, the way you facilitated that network. I think this is giving an engine to that network. What will that network look like in terms of change making, and also then how do we remove the privilege to allow people in? Thank you for articulating that so well. We're going to head back here, then we're going to go over there, and then we're going to sweep down this way, and then I'll come back around. Go ahead.
So I think language is a great key to open a conversation and to open discourse to a wider audience. So I'm inviting us sitting here to imagine if you can think of all the languages that you speak, how different this conversation would be if we were not having this conversation in English. If we had this conversation in French, how it would switch the power balance. If we had this conversation in Iroquois, in Mohawk, in Igbo, in Urdu, in Pashto, how would it change the conversation? Let's think about that as what's next, of how we move this, not just from a physical location, but how we now expand the circle of who's talking and who feels comfortable and powerful making a statement.
Instead of a Tower of Babel, a Circle of Babel, perhaps.
Yes, agreed.
I like that. I like that. I think that deserves a round of applause myself. So there's something about how do we expand the space? How do we expand the space because power is reflected through language? And I think that connects exactly what you were saying, Asa, and you began so beautifully by forcing us into that different oral space. Go ahead.
Hello. Okay. So I know that we're wonderful when it comes on to expressing and talking about all these different oppressions. And we can name racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, but this all falls underneath one umbrella, which is white supremacy. And we need to be able to talk about that and to acknowledge that, and that people on this land right now and people who are thriving, it's because of white supremacy. And my second point to that as well is that I understand that my brother from Monk said that how we should invite people into the space and just to see how we can start dialogue, but it shouldn't be on the backs of people of color to educate other people. And we already have like a wealth of knowledge here of people who have wonderful views and stuff, but I would like to employ people who are white to talk to your white people about the issue so you guys can educate things about that nature.
Thank you very much for that. And you know, I'm gonna reflect on that in one moment, and I think it's something that was no, I'll come back to you in a second. It's something that I want to reflect on from the coffee house, because this was actually a direct conversation that happened in the coffee house yesterday, is around sort of deconstructing politics. And I think, and I'm going to make an editorial comment here because I'm with you, but I think one of the places where sometimes we get stuck is the processes, is the process of doing exactly what you said that we ought to be doing. And I think that that's worth thinking about from a process perspective, because then we can take it forward in spaces like this. So I'll encourage other responses around that, but thank you for putting that directly on the table. I see voices. Respond very quickly, and then I'm going to come right back here. Go ahead, Craig.
Sorry, maybe I wasn't clear. I said that what I was saying is that a lot of people said we're in some kind of echo chamber and we're self-congratulatory and what it would mean to make it a more radically diverse set of voices. And then, you know, some of the things that we talked about, you know, should we invite a far-right activist to come and debate the merits of immigration on stage? And I said, you know, that would be equivalent to inviting a men's rights activist or like a Proud Boy or something like that, which I think would be radically unproductive, and we ought not invite those people.
Yeah, and also I think the idea of even within progressive spaces, taking down our own kind of preconceived notions about these things. We got a lot of deconstruction ourselves to do. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Veronica, and I have two comments, short ones. The first of all of them is that these 3 days helped me, you know, put into light my own contradictions and hypocrisies, because most of the time we think falsely we are better than we are. So the most uncomfortable, the most ignorant I feel, the more happy I feel. So that's the first one.
That's vulnerable. That's vulnerable, being straight.
And the second one is that regarding Coral's comment, I think she's right, because sometimes getting to the structural causes is not about pinpointing or shaming. It's about knowing what the problems take roots on, and that's a good place to start giving durable solutions. On the other hand, when we go to the structural causes, we start to look that these are the same problems that we face at home. If we start analyzing the Syrian conflict, we start talking about inequality, gender issues, religion within society, democracy, and that's the same issues we're facing in Canada, in Mexico, where I live, and everywhere. So it's a way of building bridges through conversation and through systemic analysis.
I kind of feel that there was a moment, you know, in the early 2000s where we were beginning to see sort of a lot more transnational, cross-border solidarity and social movement building. And I think what Coral and your generation is speaking to is a renewal of some of that across borders. So I want to put that. I'm going to put that to Coral in one moment, because I know you want to say something. I'm going to go to Ashraf next. No, I'm going to go to Ashraf next, and then I'm going to come back to you for a short remark, and then we're going to go here to the front row. Go ahead.
Thanks. So there were a few comments made about widening the circle, and also this comment about how do you bring others into a conversation, and a recognition that there are some voices that aren't here and some thoughts that aren't here. And so one reflection is that there is an assumption of certain things that we all agree on that was stated. There's sort of a background assumption of everyone who's coming to this space is familiar with certain concepts. They maybe have been introduced to a certain kind of conversation and already have an agreement with some of those things. But I wonder if, and if it wouldn't make us get lost in a logical world, if it would help the space to, going forward, to make explicit elements of the framework that actually animate the kind of decision-making and thinking that we have, so that we can know how it needs to be broadened. So in a way, if you want to invite more people into a conversation, you need a broader framework. You need a broader framework that includes many people and the kind of thinking that they have, so that and sometimes it's a lack of language, sometimes it's a host of these things.
And it seems to me there's been enough dialogue and conversation over 4 6 degrees gatherings that we can literally begin to map that out. And of course, we have the wonderful people who produce these videos to make it real and relevant for us. Let's definitely posit that. I know Aline is taking notes somewhere. Go ahead.
So my name is Paula, and I'm half Greek and half German. I have an engineering background, and I built my first tech in the refugee crisis in Greece on the Greek islands. And back then I was shocked by how negatively people were disrupting the system, who were motivated to actually disturb the system. And this is why I went to the point about logic, is because you know, there are people who have very clear incentives to disturb the system and to hack it. And I've seen that as an engineer. Like, my accounts were hacked over 15 times in the last year at least, and I can track where it's coming from, and it is coming from Syria. And so, you know, you question why we don't have a more creative process when it comes to disrupting the decision-making in the political process that we have today. And personally, I also question, coming from Greece, why we need to have structures that are almost collapsing in order to you know, also leave and disrupt other structures, but why we cannot talk about change in a more elegant way rather than to, you know, vote crass parties in, or why can we not be more friendly with one another? You know, I got to this gaming approach of changing structures because I did not want to become angry. That was my response personally. And there are people out there who are trying to deal with it that way, but it's it's in the end, you know, it's what you make it, I guess.
Thank you. Before we hear from you, just for a moment, I think one of the things that Will was talking about, I'm not going to put words in your mouth, Will, but by raising things like the Ghana think tank and looking at ways of co-creation and you know what the tech sector uses in kind of creativity labs, I wonder if there's a way to hack that approach for the greater good. And I almost imagine 6 Degrees in a year's time being a space where you have 5 or 6 almost citizens labs going on that are looking at real case studies, offering solutions, almost using that design, iteration, prototype thinking to get stuff on the table that is going to happen. Maybe we can get your help with that. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. My name is Eduarda. I live here in Toronto in our home. This is my husband, Larry. We're global citizens. We had the honor and privilege this past Monday morning to have our young son, who finally, after 8 years plus, become a Canadian citizen. Both of our children are from Chiang Mai, Thailand, so I can speak from a place of knowing adoption. I'm all about bringing awareness to everyone and to the government. When I'm not being mom, wife, sister, daughter, I'm on the streets. You can find me in front of the courthouse on University Avenue, feeding the homeless. I also am the coordinator of the Stepping Out program that I work with girls that are being trafficked. So I'm honored to have been here all 3 days because I find this is a forum that we need, because I find every day I'm up against, we're part of Trinity Spadina, so I'm up against our provincial and federal government bringing awareness, all 3 parties, and there's so many glitches. So we talked about walls, bridges, and homes. Walls, it's about breaking the walls of your heart and your mind. I know from experience I am totally out of my comfort zone, and it's the courage to be on the streets. The bridges are putting your hand out, or the other person puts their hand out, and you reach out. If they do not take your hand, you go down to their level, and you say, how can I help you? Last is homes. We're all immigrants. I came here. The fact is, what about the person who lives in a home that's a cardboard box, which is just outside on the street? So when I leave that day, my husband knows, I come home, I'm angry, I'm upset, I'm sad. I want to know, how can we make a difference? I'm always told all the time, be the voice of the adoption community, get into politics. And also what I'm doing with human trafficking and the homeless, but I do know that I'm an advocate because you cannot touch me, you cannot fire me, and it's all about sharing, being empathetic, and about bringing awareness. And it's having the tools to say, you know what, we can agree to disagree, but I want to hear your story. And it's all about being a voice, not an echo.
Thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead, and then we're going to come back to you, and then we're heading across the room. I just want to, Aisha, can you? I see you guys. We're going to go there, then we'll come to you. Aisha, what are we looking at for time? Because 25 minutes. All right, team. Short, sharp, and pithy. My very well dressed friend.
My name is Larry. I'm Eduardo's husband. I would just like to say that, you know, as time has gone on, and I've been here over the 3 days, something struck me very, very to the core. And being an immigrant, as I think the vast majority of us are in this room, you realize that as time goes on, your perspective changes and your identity changes. And it goes through that because your perception is your reality until you have a new experience. And when you have a new experience, it changes your perspective. And if it changes your perspective, it changes your reality. So I would suggest, as part of this forum, we need to keep doing that to the young people who are coming up, to the people who are at universities, to the people who are still in this room, who still hold old views and ideas. To give them those new perspectives changes the reality that we can change for the future. And I would say to you this, that if we can preach to each other the hope and the faith and the love, one person to another, we will change the discourse globally.
Thank you very much. Oh, you got it.
I want to thank Adrian Clarkson and John Wilson Saul and Charles Foreman for this wonderful workshop. I want to say that I am the proud mother of a Ismaili Muslim daughter-in-law, and have been saying to my husband, at some point we may have to stand up and be counted. That depends on whether there's a backlash in Canada the way there is in the States. And I'm hoping that we can figure out a way to prevent the backlash happening in Canada.
Thank you very much. I think it reminds us of present crises around racism, violence against Indigenous peoples, violence against women, so on. Thank you for highlighting that through personal experience. I just want to speak to that for a moment. I wonder if in the responses of the witnesses, we're finding a way to take that, what you're essentially describing as experiential learning. How do we take the values that we're talking about here, that you feel so deeply and strongly, into the realm of experience? How can this be, once again, a laboratory for sharing new experiences? I think about last year when we had that incredible VR, that VR room where we were taken through the eyes of a young Syrian girl right in to a refugee camp in Jordan, how harrowing and how poignant that was, and how no one who entered that room ever forgot it. So I wonder if there's ways to do that. I think that's something that we got to think about. There's been two people who've been waiting, one over here and one over here. We're going to hear from them, and then we're coming to this section here. I got you as well, sir. Don't worry about it.
Hi, Drakshan again from 6 Degrees Junior Fellow. And I think one of my favorite things from these past few days has been having, usually different movements. For example, we have people talking about, we have people who advocate usually for refugee rights in their own spaces, usually those advocating for Indigenous rights and, the different kinds of movements, women's rights, black rights, in different spaces usually. And I think that the best part that I think has led to real dialogue has been having everyone in the same space, discussing ways to kind of not just to talk about all the issues separately, but to find ways to build bridges between them. And I think that, for example, refugee rights and Indigenous rights, I think that the most important thing for myself, at least moving forward, is finding more ways to integrate and cross-pollinate and build bridges between different movements where we're not just, while we're recognizing how vastly different these issues are, but realizing how many shared interests, shared needs, and shared values are in these different communities. So maybe just a topic for discussion for maybe next time might be, how do we build movements and kind of initiatives that are going to be, I guess, working in more collaboration and having more of these discussions.
I hear that. There was an intervention right there. Could we get a mic? Oh, no problem. We're going to go there. Don't worry, we're coming to you. Go ahead.
Hello, citizens. Ryan here. And for the past 3 days, I guess I've looked at this beautiful glass thing that's a citizen space, and Espace Citoyen, and I've really thought about, what does that mean? And it's something that's so powerful of having a citizen space. So beyond just the 3 days of this conference, where does the citizen space go? Do you need a ticket to be a part of a citizen space?
That's a good question.
Where are we bringing the citizen space into our homes, our workplaces? We talked about schools and curriculums. You talked about labs, AR, which is still a field with a little bit of a barrier, and I wonder, especially in terms of widening the circle, it's very exciting, some of the partnerships with 6 Degrees in places like the Toronto Public Library. What can come of a future citizen space that's truly by the people and for the people as well? Thank you.
A very, very important question. Thank you for that, and we'll consider that in just a moment. But I want to hear these plethora of voices, and I see some of you have spoken already. I'm not ruling your contribution dilatory at this time, but I am focusing on those who haven't spoken yet because I want to hear it, and we have 15 minutes. Short, sharp, and pithy, go for it.
Got it. My name is Deanna. I wanted to bring it back to the very important topic of white supremacy, because I think that often is, speaking of elephants in the room, I think that is often something that for white people, it's really uncomfortable because there's a lot of defensiveness when the idea of white fragility, white privilege, white supremacy comes up. There's a lot of defensiveness often among us as white people where we get nervous that someone's calling us a racist, and that becomes a roadblock to discussing the systemic issue of racism, which is not about someone insulting you and calling you a racist as a white person. It's about the idea that there are racist structures, and when we're talking about things that are affecting us and affecting the world right now, things like anti-black racism, things like settler colonialism, things like international development, development and humanitarian aid. White supremacy is really underlying all of those things. Often the term raising awareness is used, and often I think that maybe we just need to raise our own awareness. And as a very clear action item, I was really blown away, as I'm sure a lot of you were, by Rennie Eddo-Lodge and her speaking and her writing. Her book, Why I Stopped Talking to White People About Race, is for sale here. I think if everyone really, but especially every white person, if every white person in the room reads that book before coming back next year, I think that would be an excellent call to action.
I think that's a very actionable suggestion. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
I would just like everyone to start thinking about inclusivity not as we should involve other groups because they've been marginalized in the past. If you're involving me as a Muslim woman, as a woman of color, it shouldn't be seen as a favor. If you're not involving me, you are losing out. And I think we should start looking at inclusivity from that perspective.
Well said. Well said. And I think that speaks to what Ashraf is saying. If those are part of our values, which I believe they are, let's explicitly state them. Go ahead.
Hey everyone, I'm Yelena, and echoing off of Sahara's point, I think if you notice someone's not in the room, we should call it out. There's been a couple of people that have called that out here, and I applaud you, Dave, I applaud you for calling that out. And I think we all have to be brave enough to say when someone's perspective is missing. And my second point is to do a bit of self-reflection and to know when we're taking up too much space. Because sometimes certain voices aren't being heard because you're taking too much space in the room, and we all have to know when to step back and listen and allow others to be echoed. Thank you.
Important reflection. Thank you.
Hi, my name's John, and as a new Canadian who emigrated here from the United States, one of the things that has really resonated with me is the sense of belonging and how we create a sense of belonging. And one of the things that I felt incredibly privileged to be welcome and to feel the welcome from the Indigenous community here and to be invited to be part of this land by the Indigenous community. And I get to work with other new Canadians a lot. And one of the things I've been really impressed with is the bonds of allyship that are building between the Indigenous community here in Canada and other new Canadians. I've seen it both ways, and I think that that's something we can build on as a strength as Canada and our experience here, and share with other places that also have that experience and really build on those strengths. So I feel really honored to be welcome and to feel that because that is not the experience at all in my country of origin.
Thank you very much for that. We're gonna go back there, and then we're gonna come over here and there, and then we're gonna have a look at the time. And I was gonna come to you in a moment because I want you to speak about a few things. Go ahead, short, sharp, and pithy, so we can get these all in. And we want to take the last 5 minutes to make sense of this whole morass.
There's just been a lot of themes of how do we make creative change and disruption? How do we learn from the youth? How do we make bridges between different movements? And like the idea of this being an echo chamber, and this is funny because I'm not really part of the nonprofit sector, and maybe these comments are a bit biased because I'm an artist and I work with small art scenes, and a lot of these conversations are continuous conversations in the scenes I'm part of. They're run by Black people, queer people, Indigenous people, people of color, women, and we're just making inclusive scenes. You go to an all-ages punk show, and there's a band with a trans woman on the drums and a woman of color screaming, and you know, a Native person on like the bass. And then the audience is reflective of the people who are on stage. So I think that if you want to broaden the circle here, you should start looking into small art scenes that are having these conversations all year long, all day long, and making it happen. They're making it work.
Okay. So this is an important point. It comes up again and again, right? And I think I'm not, once again, not going to put words in your mouth, but I'm going to riff off your artist. But part of it's culture, isn't it? I mean, do you find culture in the space? Do you find that, what's the bridge? How do you get out of that echo chamber, that activist, what you've referred to as an activist echo chamber that is woke, that is exhibiting its wokeness, that is engaged with the issues and the lingo, but continues to talk to itself?
That's a good question, but and you know what? If you look at using music as an example, because it's where I'm coming from, but one of the things that I like to do is throw all ages shows with musicians from different genres. So I had this show where an electronic band, a punk band, and a hip hop artist were playing. And suddenly the crowd was just like, you know, hip hop heads from Mississauga, young high school punk kids from Toronto, and then some weirdo electronic heads, you know? And they're all in the audience, and they came together because they came to see those specific artists, but then they like found new interest in the other people, you know? And it's not necessarily like, they're still coming together through music, but it was a way of like putting people in the same room, you know? And exchanging ideas and becoming friends. And I know I didn't really answer your question specifically.
You don't have to answer my question.
But
it
I
could
think
be a ridiculous question.
Taking people from different walks of life, different thoughts, like, yeah, it's, you know, yeah.
Bringing different tribes together. There's a lot of voices who haven't spoken. Aisha, how we doing? All right, we gotta go quick. We got 3 minutes, and I'm gonna take a whole bunch of responses. Go.
So my response is a reflection. What's next? I'm thinking about the TRC call to action and the feedback in the room regarding Indigenous voices and those being missing. And I just wonder, what does 6 Degrees look like if the starting place for the next 6 Degrees is a response to the TRC and a response led by Indigenous voices? Short and pithy.
Thank you very much. And an important question. The person right behind you, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Is this on? Okay. I'm from Turkey, and I came here 1 year ago, and I just want to say something I observed in this platform, that the non-profit sector in Canada is very thriving, and there's so many nice things going on. But I find there's a gap that kind of leaves people in a position where it invokes the question, how can I be a part of this? But you don't really know the way to get there. So I think it's very important to connect these people through these channels to find and maybe collaborate, because all these nice organizations, all these projects taking part, they should expand outside of Canada to other places. That's my...
Speaking exactly to Coral's point about transnational information sharing, go ahead back there. And we're coming to you in just a moment. Go ahead.
Hi. So I was struck by sort of 2 things. I think one, talking about who wasn't in the room. But one of the things I find really interesting about who is in the room was like sort of the intergenerational dynamic in the room.
Cool.
I'm somebody who grew up in a culture where we really revere our elders. And so I find it really interesting to see that we have people sort of from high school through into the later stages of their life. And I just wanted to sort of point that out, because that's not something that often happens when you're having these sort of discussions.
That's a really profound point, and it's even more profound because we're going to our elder next.
Elder? Excuse me. I just wanted to lighten this up, because I mean that's part of our medicine, is to always make sure that we remember to laugh, and it's important. So there's 2 stories I want to share with you. One, we were having a gathering in Sault Ste. Marie, and in the morning we waited and waited for this elder, and she finally arrived. And when she did arrive, she said, "Well, I'm really sorry for being late, but I was stopped at the border." And they asked, obviously she's Anishinaabe, and so they deal with blood quantum. And so they asked her, you know, what percentage are you of Anishinaabe? And she thought about it, and she said, well, my mother was 100%, and my father was 100%, so that I must be 200%. And so that was really important to me, and so she took it so lightly, and I thought it was really, really, really pleasant of her. And of course, she brought us to that place where it's okay, right? But to understand when we're dealing with other situations and we're imposing views from settler governments, you know, so that to take it in a really positive way. The second one was I want to acknowledge the number of people that I had a chance to speak with and share over our own views over the coffee break tables. And one I was wanting to share with you too as well, that a very good friend of mine and colleague had an emergency liver transplant last November. And with his liver transplant, it was really difficult for it to take. And I was really concerned with her because she lives in Vancouver and she works for us too as well, and I wanted her to come this way, and I had to be patient. So she was telling me her partner was teasing her because he wanted to know where did that liver come from. And so he made light of it, and he said, is it Lahonji, which is in a language means a black person. And so I was really taken back by that. And she said it was not accepting, that she was having difficulty. And I said, well, in our teachings really clearly, you need to understand that why would your liver want to accept if you're not even accepting of that liver? And so for us, we so we did, and I said, you need to do a ceremony. We need to do a feast that brings together that adoption of being part of your house. And so it just happened that we did have this feast. It hadn't been planned, but we had a feast, and we acknowledged that newer part of her body that made her whole, and acknowledge it as being really positive. And so once we did that, and she returned back to her residency in Vancouver, she went back to her doctor for an appointment that she had, and she found that her white cells and everywhere, she was back to a good place. And so it's really important in terms of the acceptance of one another, also to have humor and to ensure life isn't that serious. I mean, there's always ways and means of resolving, because clearly tomorrow is a new day. We'll have the sun, we'll be seeing each other again, and I think that's what's really critical. But I wanted to share that with you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right, I'm gonna take two final comments from the table. I'm gonna come back to the witnesses. We're all gonna make this happen in 4.5 minutes. Go ahead first, and then to the gentleman here. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Nick, and I'm with Access Now, and I'm a digital rights activist. So I've done a lot of listening over the last few days, and what I'm going to do, what's next for me, is I'm going to be taking a lot of the lessons and sort of challenges facing inclusion and citizenship and bringing them to a lot of the tech platforms and digital sort of powers in order to bring these conversations to them. And that's my goal, because a lot of discussion that takes place now is happening on the online world, and a lot of the barriers that exist outside in the macro, they exist on the digital world, and they're actually reinforced in the digital world. And so my job is to try to bring a platform to bring these discussions to those tech companies that are making these sorts of barriers and walls and bridges as well, and homes. And so that's my job. Thanks.
I see a partnership in the making. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. My name's Carl. I've been here only for the last 2 days. I just wanted to introduce the concept of political will. I don't think I've heard that phrase in my time here today, these past days. So many studies have been done about why this, why that, what we're doing here, and it's all amazing, and I'm so privileged and happy to be here. People in government know what we need to do. I was reminded of a movie, I just looked it up to remember the name. It's called After the Last River. It's all about the rape of the land. It's about De Beers diamond mines building under budget, under time, the most amazing project, diamond mine on Aboriginal land, and the way they cheated them out of their rights and their this and that. And I thought, well, so the government gave the diamond company the rights to do this. Why didn't they just hire the same construction company to fix the water? No, we need another study. We need another study. Political will.
Aisha, how are we doing? Are we done? Oh, witnesses. I'm sorry I wasn't able to come back to you. A few concluding remarks before I invite John and Adrian up onto the stage. I think there's been a lot of threads of conversation, and I firstly want to thank again our 6 witnesses. A round of applause for them, and to all the people who participated in this panel. So one of the things that's clear to me, and you're free to disagree with me, of course, is that I think a lot of what's been said in the room has been not just fascinating, but a lot of it's been amazing. But but a number of the themes have tied back into the things that the six of you raised. And I think a lot of what we've been talking about is part of it is around structure, increasing the network, amplifying. How do we use this space, create this space, grow this space organically in a way that begins to connect us in a deeper way and deepen the conversation? At the same time, I've heard, and I think the last comment was indicative of that, and I actually feel it's been a strong undertone, is not only around political will, but the politics of action. What are the kind of actions that we are taking, not only within the space, but what are the actions that are being inspired outside of this space? The stuff that's already going on and the future stuff that would be possible. You could only have a guy like Will Prosper talk about Afrofuturism, as Robert Johnson just said in my ear. And I want to end on that. I want to end on something you said, Will, right at the end of your comments, around the past and the future. And thank you so much for that comment, reminding us not only to laugh and not only about the hope of the future, but actually this connection that we've been hearing constantly over the last 3 days about the past, present, and what we can accomplish together. And I think what's really profound about movements like Afrofuturism is to imagine not only radically different, just, merciful, compassionate, equitable, inclusive worlds, but to do so with an eye on where we came from and the experiences that we carry in ourselves, in our bodies, in our DNA, in our colors, and in who we are in our experiences. And I think, and I'm hoping, that the ideas that have been generated here today are the ones that are going to go right back into John, Adrian, and Charlie, and Aline, and Aisha, and Karen, and all the great people who run this organization. They're thinking, in order to make sure that when we gather here in a year's time, because God willing, we will be gathering here in a year's time, is to ensure that we see that conversation taken forward. And we ask ourselves the difficult questions about what we are willing to sacrifice, what we're willing to give up, what we're willing to stake for the kind of world that we think is needed and the kind of vision that we hopefully collectively are able to adopt. And alongside of that, to recognize the fault lines that exist between us and the bridges through tension, to quote Craig, that we can build. It's been my honor to have hosted this session. Thank you so much for being an incredible group of participants. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to John and to Adrian, and Karen is going to give you your mics. Thank you very much, everybody.
This is over.
Oh,
We're not getting chairs.
It's over. Thanks, Karen. Well, I just want to say that it's been a wonderful couple of days, and it's not over yet because we have the prize giving tonight with Ai Weiwei, who is very special. And you know, who's seen the film, those of us who've seen the film know how important a human being he is. And so to give him the Global Citizen Award is to acknowledge that humanity and that extraordinary scope of being which he is. And I want to thank you all for taking part in this. It's a most enriching experience because you're all here, you're listening, you're giving back, and all of that is palpable. You know, when human beings are together, there is a kind of thing around them that we often ignore because we think we only communicate by talking or by gesturing or whatever. But in our purest state as human beings, we feel each other. We sense each other. We know that we are together. And that's what I've sensed in these few days with you, and which I'm going to know is going to happen again tonight when we welcome Ai Weiwei and give him that prize, because he's part of us and he expresses something of us, and you've helped to do that, all of you. And it doesn't matter whether you've agreed or whether you think we haven't achieved this. This is a work in progress. We're doing this all together, and I want you to continue to do it with us next year. We will have different things. We hope we'll go to 2 or 3 other places between now and then, the way last year we went to Berlin, we went to, that's a Freudian slip, we went to The Hague, and we went to Vancouver, and we hope to do that kind of thing again. So we'll be bringing back people, integrating them with them, and you've been part of that now, and I hope you will continue to be, even if you can't join us physically, that you will be with us, this great chain of being. Thank you.
So following on the elders' comments about not taking it too seriously, we know that the first thing we're willing to give up, those of us involved in organizing 6 Degrees, the staff particularly, is sleep. And not just for 3 days, for a couple of months actually. And I also want to say that for us it was absolutely essential, and we started doing it last year, the first year, that this whole thing began with the citizenship ceremony where Indigenous voices, several Indigenous voices, in fact, 3, I think almost half the voices were Indigenous, was an essential way to begin, and to do the whole thing under the wonderfully humorous and political will painting of Kent Monkman, and I'm so grateful that the last intervention was from you, ma'am, and thank you so much for your contributions. Et je vais ajouter que l'argument Tour de Babel, who talked about Tower of Babel? I've forgotten in all of this now.
I think it was AR, no, or Will?
No, it was Will, wasn't it? Anyway.
Tour de Babel?
Yeah. That you know, that we, in a way, one of our failures has been, it's in English. We all know that. And on est très content cette année qu'il y a au moins une délégation qui est venue de Montréal, et j'espère que vous allez revenir l'année prochaine et qu'il y aura plus de gens de Montréal et une plus grande présence francophone. And that in a sense, the Swiss have this great thing, which is they have 3 official languages and there's no translation. And I think that's something Canadians could learn. People just speak in the language, and then everybody has to do the best they can to understand it. And if they don't understand, somebody who's sitting next to them can tell them. And I really think the Swiss are way ahead on this. And we have, in the Tour de Babel tradition, this is a great force, the multiplicity of languages. And at the heart of that, we have been at least allowed to hear a little bit of Indigenous languages, not enough, but I think it would be great to hear more. And finally, I was really moved to hear the number of times the word movement was used in this last session. This is not a networking session. This is not, a meeting of interest groups. This is really about an essential movement at a time when, frankly, racism is on the rise, when populism, when there are enormous dangers out there. And we have to, part of expanding the circle is, yes, it is defining the language, coming up with the language, coming up with the words which will allow us to go out there and explain why what we're doing is important. And so we're going to be working on that all the way through this year, here and in different cities. And I think probably, Charlie, don't you think, I was thinking about it, listening to this, that by the time we come back next year, we put out quite a bit of language, but we'll put out more language between now and then and see if it helps the discussion and the debate to shape it. And when you've succeeded, the number of us are writers, when people start using the language that you've put out there. And the language we're putting out there has come in large part from you. So, merci beaucoup, Miigwech, thank you very much, and it's been great, and we'll see you tonight.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adrian and John. Again, wonderful to have you with us. Right now, there is a mix and mingle that's going to be taking part up in the Education Commons. It's a cash bar with nibbles. So your last opportunity to connect with people you haven't yet met but would like to. And I would call on any of our staff who are waiting in the wings to please come down now. We'd like to take a group photo, as well as the volunteers, everyone up on stage. And thanks again, and we'll see you next year.